And now, David will give us our scripture for today.
Today's reading comes from the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3. To everything there is a season, and a time for every purpose under heaven. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to tear down, and a time to build up. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones, and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to lose, and a time to seek. A time to tie up, and a time to untie. A time to rend, and a time to sow. A time to keep silent, and a time to talk. A time to love, and a time to hate. A time for war, and a time for peace. And now Reverend Macaulay will give us our lesson sermon.
Well, and I can remember a time when I thought those verses were written by the birds. My sermon today is entitled, Can You Empower Yourself with Optimism? Well, here we are at the start of a new year and a new presidential administration. A week from tomorrow, we'll observe Martin Luther King Day as a nation, and the following day we'll celebrate the inauguration of the first African American president in the history of our esteemed country. A new day is dawning in America, and change looms on the horizon. There's an interesting verb, looms. The dictionary definition of looms says, to come into view as a massive, distorted, or indistinct image. Seems to me that that's a perfect use of the word. The inauguration of President-elect Obama will, I expect, bring massive change to our world. What will those changes look like once they are manifest? I suppose that's the big question. At this point, we can only use our imagination, as current images are definitely indistinct. In our scripture this morning, we were reminded that to everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under the sun. Let's take a moment this morning to sharpen those indistinct images and bring them into focus so that we can examine them with a bit more clarity. Without enumerating the news events in detail, there's been turmoil and conflict around the world, especially in the past month. Many of us look forward to the inauguration of President-elect Obama to solve many of these problems, and who knows where we will be a year from now, or even 4 years from today. Many of us have suffered losses in our retirement accounts. We've seen the values of our homes diminish. We may have lost jobs or seen our incomes diminish. These looming changes affect many of us at our gut level. We may tend to worry about lack either in our distant or immediate future. Without an income, how would we pay our bills? Where would we live? What would we eat? The what-ifs just keep filling our mentalities with disastrous, unhealthy pictures. Many of us find ourselves asking, now what? Or what's next? Of course, those expressions can be read with skepticism, or optimism. And today I want to suggest that each one of us may find ourselves standing at that old familiar crossroad, wondering which road to take. My suggestion this morning is that you take the optimistic road. If you take an overall view of history, it's clear that there will be a period of recovery. And just as there are lean times, there will also necessarily be periods of prosperity. We know that life runs through cycles. The moon waxes and wanes monthly. Seasons make our weather vary from very cold to very hot and back. Sometimes we wear many layers of clothing to keep warm, and at other times of the year we wear very little. There's a time when we decorate our homes for Christmas, and there's a time when we put those decorations away for a while. We plant seeds in the spring and harvest those crops in the fall. Sometimes those harvests exceed our wildest expectations, and sometimes those harvests are less than what we had hoped for. But the fact is that whatever it is we're doing, we need to keep going. When you find yourself at the crossroad, thinking to yourself, now what? Remember that you have an opportunity at that very moment to change your mentality from skepticism to optimism simply by your tone of voice, your attitude. As metaphysicians, we know that prayer is getting into the attitude of the thing desired. We know that prayer doesn't work when we're angry, hostile, or full of negative emotions. We know the law of abundance. Enough and to spare for my every need now. You know that it's God's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. If you're in tune with the law, in an attitude of gratitude, and you constantly maintain an outlook of optimism in your approach to everything in life, your situation has to improve. Your life situation, whatever it is, can improve as long as you're able to keep the negative thoughts out of your mentality. As long as you can keep thinking positive thoughts, you can make progress going forward. But if you allow just one negative thought to disrupt your pattern of thinking, you can easily slide back and lose all the previous progress you might have made. Now, in particular, there are many really good reasons to expect a better future for each one of us. First of all the citizens of our country were just tested. We held national elections, and record numbers of voters turned out in droves to select the first African American president in history. 143 short years after the abolition of slavery. This one simple act opens the doors for all minorities and is clearly a sign of a new beginning in American history, a beginning of which we can all be proud. Secondly, the economy has suffered substantially to the point where even the wealthiest people in the country are claiming that they've taken big hits. We've all suffered in one way or another, and in keeping with the cycle of life, we must assume going forward that recovery is just around the corner. We may have a ways to go before we reach that corner, but I believe prosperity for all is in sight and will be ours once again. Thirdly, we are Americans. We're all familiar with the American dream. We all know that when God gives us lemons, we make lemonade. Every day we see examples of the American dream in action. We sent a man to the moon and returned him safely to Earth within 10 years because we made it a priority to do so. We've seen many like Lance Armstrong say no to cancer and then subsequently win 7 Tour de France races. We saw an African American man beat a white man in the race for President of the United States. We've seen former President Jimmy Carter leave the comfort and safety of his home, don a tool belt and overalls, and help build thousands of houses for many who could not afford them otherwise. Fourthly, we are metaphysicians. Whether you call yourself a metaphysician or not, the fact that you have opened this sermon lesson and are listening to it or reading it with interest indicates that you are on a spiritual path.